We all know exactly what it's like to have to manage behaviour. We're really excited to not only unpack it a little more today, but also share a really incredible strategy for approaching behaviour management.
We want to make sure that we are not just redirecting a behaviour, but we're prioritising and putting the relationship with that young person as the first priority. That's really important because as educators in such packed curriculums, in workplaces where we are working with students under such high pressure situations,
I think playful brings that common ground out as well, because there's so many times where a student feels so far away from a teacher, but play brings them more close together to almost their childhood as well, and allows them to connect again, building that relationship too.
Podclass acknowledges the true and traditional custodians of the land we meet on here today. We are meeting in Naarm and pay our respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you
when the students start to riot.
I'll be here for you
even if your coffee is gone cold.
I'll be here for you 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello and welcome back to Podclass. It has been a while. We've had our school holiday break and now we are so excited to be back in your ears. You are joined as always by your hosts, Skye, that is me, and Amanda,
That is me.
the co-founders of Youth Engagement Project, and our dear friend Wil Massara, the CEO and founder of Youth Leadership Academy Australia.
It is
Hello.
Wilson. And you may notice we are in a new studio because we have a couple weeks of work here in Sydney and we're excited to be here.
Excited to be on Gadigal country today and excited to be back in your ears. I'm going to use Skye's phrase.
Excited to be back in everyone's ears. We are.
We actually have video too. You can see us in the eyes.
And in your
Hello.
eyes. Well, actually, speaking of new things that look different, it's not just the studio. Skye Hughes, a big change in your life.
I know, it was a really big decision, but I finally decided to get a fringe. We are really excited today because we have been essentially asking people about what it is about teaching and working with students that really either is stuff that is grinding their gears or things that they're really passionate about that they would love to hear us kind of talk about. And I suppose today's episode is the one about behaviour management.
Bum, bum, bum.
Ooh, yeah.
It is that I feel like, you know, in all places and all spaces, we know about behaviour management, you know, whether we are at the front of a classroom managing a group of young people and their, you know, distinct and unique behaviours, or whether maybe we run programs or whatever we do, we all know exactly what it's like to have to manage behaviour. And so we are actually really excited, as Skye said, you know, it's come up a lot, this behaviour management piece, and we're really excited to not only unpack it a little more today, but also share a really incredible strategy for approaching behaviour management that ultimately, I mean, we believe using that strategy also reduces the very use of it, reduces the behaviours, which reduces the need for behaviour management. And it's this really supportive cycle.
And the media absolutely loves talking about behaviour in school right now. And I think if we talk more about solutions and the cause, and this is what the framework allows us to do too.
Yeah. And I feel it's important to acknowledge that behaviour management, regardless of your school setting, is always going to be a thing. So whether you're a teacher in a private system or a public setting or, you know, in a remote community somewhere, behaviour management just looks different.
It does.
And we were kind of talking off air before we started, and Wil, you asked a great question. Would you like to repeat that question?
I did.
Wil Massara with the great question.
Always.
What causes bad behaviour?
Yeah.
Especially, well, more directly, what causes bad behaviour in a classroom?
And I feel like, can I just, before we answer, I feel like some of the stigma around the label bad is something we can address here throughout this episode as well, because behaviour is behaviour and there are choices that young people can make that maybe aren't ideal choices. However, I think one of the things we're going to unpack is not necessarily labeling things as bad and good, but acknowledging that through different experiences and through different challenges that young people are facing, they're going to respond in different ways.
And I think what you've done is hit the nail on the head there around separating as well the behaviour from the young person or the student that we're working with. And Wil, I know we started to talk about where behaviour itself kind of comes from, because what we see is we just see like the physical response. We look at facial expressions or tone of language or tone of language, that was really good. Body language.
Are you an English
tone
teacher?
of voice, body language. We look for all those things, right, in our students, and they're like the cues that we get to ask ourselves, well, is this young person someone who needs help right now, or what's going on for them? But the only thing that we have to judge or make a judgment in terms of how to support them is what we can see and what they're giving us. But what do we know? What we know is that that's just the tip of the
iceberg. There are
it was
so
like we
many
planned
things.
that and we did it.
There are so many things that are below the surface that we can't see, and I don't want to be assumptuous, but I think it is one of our responsibilities as educators and people that work with young people to ask the questions where we can unveil maybe a little bit more of what's underneath the surface, and how do we get below surface level of like, what are the real causes that have led to this moment?
Yeah, and I feel like at the very least, it is our responsibility to acknowledge that there is much more going on always than what we see.
Yeah.
And when a young person walks into our classroom or walks into our program, you know, what we witness is just what is right at the surface in that moment, and we don't know what's come before. And so I think what we're going to cover today really supports us in bringing empathy to that and also bringing awareness to that, because we know what it's like young people are not that different to us, and we know what it's like to walk into a space or a workplace or a school, you know, having had something go down last night or this morning, or maybe not feeling 100% or whatever it is, and feeling like, and you know, someone says a single comment that just maybe grinds our gears a little, or we just can't quite handle in that moment, and we feel something rise, and then, you know, we have those moments ourselves, and young people are no different. And so I think absolutely having awareness for the fact that we're only witnessing just the surface of what's going on.
I just want to acknowledge before we actually get into the framework that we're going to take a quick look at is, I know for me personally as an educator, sometimes I can get caught up in that idea that a young person should be able to regulate and should be able to know what's going on for them and should be able to communicate clearly, like, I'm struggling with this, or today I'm having a bad day, or whatever it is. And like, I know that because like I have a fully developed brain. I mean, that's still to be determined. But, you know, and our young people, they're in such an important part of their development process, whether you teach in primary school or high school settings, and acknowledging where they're at and what they're actually capable of at that moment, and kind of meeting them in that space.
And if they are being taught these skills, like emotional intelligence, them fundamental skills, like, again, huge privilege.
Absolutely.
And not learning it in like not learning it from trauma, or not learning it from hardship as well.
Yeah.
And so I think let's have a key takeaway at here be that as much as behaviours can feel so personal sometimes. I mean, I know for me in my career and my journey, it's really challenging when we're facing, you know, what feels like a challenging situation with a student, to not take it personally. And yet, you know, it's like, if I cut open an orange and juice an orange, what am I going to get?
Orange juice.
Orange juice. What's coming out of a young person is a reflection of what's going on inside them.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I like that.
And so
I was like, where are you going?
And now we talk fruit. No,
and
not
now
really.
I'm thirsty.
And what comes out of an apple? No, not really. But it's like, it's a reflection of what's going on within them. It's a reflection of what's happening beneath the surface. And as much as it can feel personal, look personal, and even technically, objectively, you know, be personal in that moment, it's really not. It's really a reflection of something going in within that young person.
So that's all great. What do we do about it? How do we manage it? And I think that's what we should get into. So we would love to explore a concept that was developed by a guy called Dr. Dan Hughes, and my surname is Hughes, so I chose him
So naturally, he's your uncle?
Yeah, no. He's an American psychologist, and he really came from a trauma-informed background and working with students that had backgrounds of trauma. And so what I love about this model and his model is that it is trauma-informed and it really respects where any young person can be at any one time. And I guess the premise of it is the model's called PACE, P-A-C-E, PACE, and we'll look at what each of those letters stands for. But I guess the overall premise is that we want to connect first, then redirect behaviour or misbehaviour. And I think that's really important because as educators in such packed curriculums, in workplaces where we are working with students under such high pressure situations, we want to make sure that we are not just redirecting a behaviour, but we're prioritising and putting the relationship with that young person as the first priority. So that's the connect piece before we redirect.
And it's interesting because I feel like it could be so easy to wonder if maybe that time spent there in relationship building is, you know, quote unquote like wasted time, but it's an investment, you know,
So much of an investment.
and it's you know, we've spoken about engagement, we've spoken about relatedness being a core psychological need of all people and is, you know, present in our young people. And so building that relatedness, building that relationship, connecting is such an investment.
And I love a side note. I was going through all of my reports the other week, and I literally would read.
Because you went home.
I went home, and I
Saw Mum Karen.
Saw Mum Karen, and all of my reports are there. And I'm just going through and reading the teachers' names, and some of them are just like say some not very nice stuff about, and then the other ones I'd be like, "Oh, Mum, look at this comment," and it'd be like because that relationship was so strong.
Yeah.
And I remember in year 7 it was one of the strongest relationships I ever had with a teacher, and the comment reflected that, and it was probably one of the best years of schooling that I had as well.
Oh, it's amazing.
And also the behaviour in that classroom. Mwah.
And also such a nice
Your
reminder.
behaviour?
No. Oh, yes. And also everyone else's. But interestingly, we only had him 4 days a week because in primary school we have him every day. And we had one we had one teacher on the Wednesday, and he didn't have the same relationship with anyone, and the behaviour on a Wednesday would be out of control. Then old mate would come back on the Thursday and have to, you know, pull us back into line.
Interesting. Maybe a note on boundaries there, and also shout out to all of our beautiful part-time teachers that manage that juggle, because coming in and being the 1 day a week person, you know, we have so many teachers that do that, whether it be because of family or whatever that is, and that's also, you know, would be a huge balance to find as well.
Challenge for you, Wilson. Throughout, as we move through PACE, I'd love to come back to ask you at the very end if you believe that relationship you had with this teacher reflected the way they used maybe elements of PACE or PACE, like in that practice as well.
I love that.
So good
Let's get into
segue.
it.
The P in PACE stands for playfulness. So playfulness is all about, obviously, our response. We know what play means and what it is. It's not something we would typically attach to behaviour management. So what I love about this is that it helps to use humour. It helps to diffuse kind of the situations, and it also creates a bit of a diffusing through the humanness of that play. And when we can tap into that inner child and find joy or whatever it is in those moments that can often be high tension or high stress or high anxiety or whatever it is for that young person, it can just help to bring them back into that room and back into the present moment with you as the educator.
You're two people I actually really admire with your capacity to bring in humour and playfulness in those moments. You know, I've witnessed you both with young people, and they might be having an overstimulated moment, or they might be, you know, not feeling engaged with the content, and your ability to approach that in more of a light-hearted way, you know, with kind of a, oh, what have we got here kind of vibe, you know, and that energy, because, you know, the flip side of that, I guess, is coming in with something that could possibly be a little thwarting to the place that the young person is on. If we think about what's at the opposite end of playfulness, you know, maybe more something like control or whatever that is. It doesn't, entering with playfulness, it doesn't lead our young people to guard themselves in that situation.
I also want to just acknowledge it can also feel counterintuitive to tap into play in those situations.
Yeah.
Because especially as teachers, you might have a class of 26 students in front of you, and there's one student that's maybe showing some behaviour that's not really helping the learning environment, and you know that needs to be dealt with. How do you do that in a way that's like your responsibility for the other 25 students in a class, and then a reminder to be like, how do I be playful in this moment And it can feel really counterintuitive. So I guess for me, I had to learn to lean into that and really reflect on that in the moment and not feel like I use PACE. It's something I used in school and how I managed many of my classrooms. And sometimes I didn't do the P first. I might have done the A, the C, the E, which we'll get into, and then I came back to the P as a closing piece. So just know as we're going through these as well that they're kind of interchangeable. We can use them in combination and in a different order. It doesn't have to go in this exact order.
The recipe ingredients.
I think that we've spoken about it before, but I think playful brings that common ground out as well, because there's so many times where a student feels so far away from a teacher, but play brings them more close together to almost their childhood as well, and allows them to connect again, building that relationship too.
Love that. So that's play.
The P stands for playfulness. The A stands for acceptance. And this one is really all about, and once again, would love to acknowledge it can feel a little counterintuitive because sometimes there might be situations going on that are really challenging to accept for us as educators and us leading young people. However, what acceptance does in the moment is it doesn't make the young person wrong, and we can redirect and get to a place where we look to find. I've just had a moment.
That's all right. You can have a moment. Yeah. I think acceptance for me is really that piece about, yes, not making students wrong, but also making sure that they know that regardless of their behaviour, we still accept them. We still hold space for them. We still acknowledge exactly them for who they are. And we're not going to allow them to, say, be given a label of well, you're the naughty kid or whatever it is, because what we also know in our experience of teaching and from working with so many different educators in the professional development space, and Will, you probably experience this in school with your peers, is that when a young person is given a label consistently and they're not accepted as who they are outside of the behaviour, they start to actually live up to that label. Tends to be something that happens, and that can be it's not great.
Acceptance allows us as teachers to rewrite that story for them as well, to support them in rewriting their own story and what they tell themselves. And if we keep allowing them to start believing that, then we're playing a part that ultimately leads to more behaviour challenges in school too.
Yeah. So acceptance, it's not making them wrong and it's not making this situation wrong. And the reality, it's a fact. Here's where we are. So acceptance allows us a platform to move forward from.
And there would probably be, I have a question. Many people may be like, well, we have to discipline young people. And there's many conversations that we can't always make them right. What's the solution to that?
Yeah, and I feel like we will explore it a little more, but I know for Skye and I, what we firmly believe, and I know you do as well, Will, is that in these situations, making the young person wrong as a person is never the answer. What we can do is pull the behaviour from the young person, and we can ask, about the choices that are being made, and then take it to a place of ownership rather than, rather than saying you're wrong, it's well, what's happening here? And I think that leads us really well.
It's a really nice segue. So the C in PACE stands for curiosity. And what we all believe is that you can't sit in curiosity and judgment at the same time. So if we are coming from a place where we feel as though we're judging a student or judging a behaviour, chances are we're not sitting in that space of curiosity. And curiosity is really about just asking questions. It's being curious as to what is actually going on beneath the tip of the iceberg for that student. And we do that through asking questions and through holding space as we explore that. And it might be something like, hey, little Jimmy, I've noticed, I don't know why
Jimmy's back.
Hey, little Jimmy's back.
Number 10.
Hey, little Jimmy, I've noticed that you are struggling to start this task right now. Is there something that I can do to help make this easier for you? Or what is it that you need right now? And we start to ask these kind of what questions to get to the core of it. Sometimes why questions can be really big and overwhelming for young people if they're in a state of distress. So when we stick to what questions or how questions, it can be a little bit easier. But it's just being curious and not judging their behaviour because we don't know what's beneath their surface, and this is how we find out.
And even, it's coming in with I've noticed we're flicking pens. What's happening here?
Yeah.
You know, like that alone.
Playful as well.
It is. It's
Yeah.
playful, it's acceptance, and it's curious, right?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, we're not shooting guards up, but maybe we're also calling the young person to self-reflect in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us into E, which stands for empathy. What we know is that empathy is an incredibly powerful building block and tool to having a trusting environment and a trusting classroom with our students. And if we can hold empathy, I really think this comes back to us acknowledging that so often what we see is that surface level piece. And so holding empathy in how we act and how we intentionally interact with our students acknowledges that there's a lot going on we can't see and that's okay. But we have to accept that and we have to meet them where they're at because we can't meet them anywhere else. No. And if we're not meeting them where they're at, then there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And we're, you know, and that's not going to fuel relationship building.
And all of these things, pace, so the playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy is our behaviour management tool. It's not saying it's the be all and end all of behaviour management and that's what's going to work for every young person in every classroom, but it's something that we can reflect on and consider in our practice to see if when we are working with young people, it's an effective tool. So Wil, your teacher,
Oh my
do
gosh,
you
this
think
story.
do you think that pace was like maybe at the root of some of that relationship building and that, I don't know, that comfort that you felt in that
there
class?
was so many questions asked, and halfway through the year, we just turned our classrooms into one of them open plan living classrooms because
Open plan living.
but literally
Reminds
it was like
me of this podcast studio.
exactly, and it was just because it was out of curiosity and what results that would lead to as well.
Yeah.
And my question back is, a lot of schools do have like positive behaviour initiatives and PBI and all this stuff. Is it effective? And what is one key thing that we can do in our classroom if we can't control outside of our classroom to be able to foster behaviour?
I mean, for me, I go to, and it's interesting you brought up before, well, what about discipline, you know? And I think boundaries are incredibly important as educators. And
Consistent boundaries.
Exactly. I think having boundaries and then not meeting them is, I'm sorry to say it, like a breeding ground for behaviour management challenges.
Yeah.
Is really truly, in my experience, like that, like as an educator, like that's the journey I've gone on.
Yeah.
And so as much as I have had at times, to be really honest, like real struggles and challenges with implementing boundaries and following through on boundaries, you know, it builds respect, it builds trust, and it allows our young people to feel held. And I feel like within the boundaries of our classroom, young people can explore within them. And if we're experiencing young people stepping out of those boundaries, we can use pace to support them to self-reflect and walk themselves back into being within the boundaries.
Yeah, real culture building piece.
Yeah.
So that is pace, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy.
We cannot wait to see you next week. We are Podclass and we will see you very soon.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye-bye.
Have fun. Have a play.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.